All right. Awesome. Well, welcome to our podcast. We're going to be talking today about some things. I'm David Segall, and this is...
Connor Cherland.
We're both musicians out there in the real world doing our thing, making a living, utilizing our creative gifts and abilities. And we wanted to talk a little bit today on this podcast about our experiences of functioning in the world and balancing our creative side with our pragmatic side, the artist side with the business layperson side, our left brain and our right brain together. So, yeah, Connor, you were talking about a few things that have been going around your musical skull lately, and what are those?
Yeah. Well, first off, I just want to start throwing curveballs at you immediately.
Oh, okay.
Why?
Great.
Remind me why you want to start a podcast.
I want
With me specifically.
with
We've
you
talked about
specifically.
this before. We've been
Yeah.
on walks. We hang out,
Right.
and we've said to each other, we should do a podcast together.
Yeah.
Why is that a desire for you?
One of the reasons was that both you and
One
I...
is your voice. I mean,
well, thank you, and your voice
well,
too.
thank you.
Our voices. No, but so yes, Connor and I have known each other for over a year now. Gosh, maybe been a year and a half. And as I said, we're both professional musicians, but we come from different backgrounds, slightly different styles, even different methods in terms of what we do. And so every time that we get together to talk, we're usually talking about our respective experiences, some of the lessons that we've learned, some of the different avenues we've tried, just knowing that two heads are better than one when it comes to figuring out the wild west of the music world today. You could also say that it's sort of a wild west of the whole internet age, where
Sure.
anybody who's creative
Right.
and has an idea and also is a little business savvy can take a creative idea and, make it flourish. So, yeah, as creatives, we know that it serves us all so much more to build one another up and to share experiences, share our stories, share what's worked and what's not worked,
Right.
ideas we haven't thought of before. So that was the impetus of us, I think, coming together to talk every time we've come together to connect. And I think for me, one of the reasons why I wanted to create a podcast is to share this with others, knowing that it could be of value to other people out there who are finding their footing as artists, creators, entrepreneurs, small business owners.
Yeah.
And to hopefully share a little bit of inspiration.
That's great.
from the
I
road.
mean, I agree, and I would say, like, at the end of our conversations, we both typically feel very good. And
Yeah.
we're both like vibing and enjoying each other's company and
Yes.
learning from each other. And I think we know a lot of people who can, other musicians or other creatives that would benefit from those sorts of conversations. And
Yes.
and I think that's just been another part where we're like, man, we're saying some great stuff.
Yeah, well, it's interesting, because in conversation in general, inspiration can come up for sure.
Right.
It generally does, and I think
Right.
that's one of the things I know in our community, in my community, a lot when I'm getting together with like minds and just we're talking about our journeys. We're each on our own hero's journey,
Right.
and so sharing that experience with one another and keeping this conversation rolling, it helps to uncover some of the mysteries, some of the unknown. It helps to spring forth some inspiration.
Right.
Because I don't know about you, but as a creative person who's kind of forging their own path, or being their own boss, however you want to put that, one of the most valuable resources for us to tap into on a continual basis is inspiration, because it's very easy to get disheartened, to get discouraged.
Right.
Because
All the time.
Because it's a path. It's a path full of what's the term? I don't want to say letdowns, but there's going to be a lot of failed experiments, A lot of
Right.
failed experience, and a lot of people take failed experiments to think, oh, I'm a failure. I think it's the successful people who say, okay, well, that didn't work. Let me try something else. That didn't
Right.
work. Let me try something else. So
Right.
that's what we're here offering.
Yeah. Yeah. I think you were saying inspiration flows from our conversations.
Mhm.
There's this Irish guy named John O'Donohue who I really like his books, and he talks about how most conversations nowadays are intersecting monologues, not actual communications.
Right.
Because when we talk, like, you're very good at listening, and
Thank you.
what one of the things that I've really enjoyed about you is randomly you'll call me and be like, "Hey Connor, I've been thinking about you
Yeah.
and thinking about like the health of your voice, and there are these exercises that I've learned and I want to teach them to you for your voice to like help your longevity." And I'm like, who thinks of me? Like, I'm like, you're not in my family. Like, you're not
Right.
my mom. What?
Right.
That's amazing. Like, it's super kind, and it's because you actually connect with people, which is it's a rarity. And what's nice about our demeanor is that we're both like, neither of us is the guy who needs to be heard. Both of us want to hear each other.
Yeah. Yeah.
And that's just a wonderful way to have conversations. So that
Yeah.
I think that's a dynamic that we have that's kind of special. That I it's much more rare, especially in the more showboaty career path that we've chosen for ourselves.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
No, I appreciate you bringing that up, and it also brings up a good point, and it's something we've talked about before too, which is outgrowing this old, I think, outdated mindset of competition being the driving force behind what we're doing, and instead understanding that that our true power is in collaboration, which is building each other up, offering whatever hand we can in the process, knowing that we're much more deeply, all of us are much more deeply connected than we ever realize at any given time. And I talk about this from coming from a place where I've been in the more competitive mindset of, I'm not going to share my secrets or whatever, and I don't want to mingle with that guy who's my quote unquote competitor or whatever, and instead understanding that we can create opportunity together. We can create opportunity together through creating more community, through creating more of a support system amongst ourselves as musicians, and really again amongst the creatives in our community. So yeah,
well, and also we live in Santa Barbara, where there is a lower amount of musicians than a lot of other cities, and we live in the wedding capital, and like a lot of
wine country,
right?
Yeah.
So there are more gigs than there are musicians, I think, and we have the joy of, like, when we can't do a gig, we hand it to each other.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
that's just another like really practical way that it makes me grateful for you,
Right.
and I get to play that night and make money, or vice versa, and that is so helpful, because having
Totally.
people looking out for gigs for you.
Yeah.
Obviously, if there's a gig that you can do and they asked you, you're gonna do that gig.
Sure.
But if you can't, you're like,
You can't always be
right.
there. Yeah.
Then you're like, then I have guys that I'm gonna hit up and they can
for
do
sure.
it.
For sure.
Yeah, and then it stays in the family, and then we're all
Exactly.
we're all helping each other.
Totally. And again, that ties into that whole, like the whole cloth theory, that we weave an intricate fabric together, and when something, we have to miss something, it can go to the other person, and everybody's fed. And so, the more I live, the more I look at life like permaculture or organic farming, the way that it's kind of meant to be. It's about diversity.
Yeah.
It's about, you look in the natural world, and it's just variation is everywhere. And this is an interesting topic, I think, because in the world of business, or the kind of the capitalist side of us, we I think we've all wanted to be pop stars in our respective fields. Like, I would love to be the Michael Jackson or the Bruno Mars, the guy who's like getting, the most money on tour and the most plays on radio. But from a more organic, truthful stance, music is music, and it's something just like, business is business, or architecture is architecture. It's each field is sort of its own entity, and we're just messengers of that entity. We're just devotees of whatever that might be. And so I think again, that's a huge shift, personally speaking, for me, is going from this concept of I, me, mine, and I wanna make it. And I mean, yes, I want to be successful doing what I love doing in the world,
Right.
but it's more important to me at this point that there is just beautiful music in the world coming from a variety of places, because I
Right.
know how important music is to the sanity and the health of society
Yeah.
at large. So and as we were saying, musicians, I think creative people in general, or artistic entrepreneurs, all of the above, they can be a rare, the really good, effective ones can be hard to find. So to me, it's like, let's water all those precious flowers in
Right.
our community, because they're not, it's not a dime a dozen,
Hmm.
So, yeah.
That's true. Yeah, one of the reasons why I feel very passionate about like being successful in this business and making money is because I've met so many great musicians who have had to quit
Mm-hmm.
because they didn't have enough.
Hmm.
And I think that is like people who are way more skilled than me, or a lot of
Right.
people that I know,
Sure.
and they just have to quit because they just don't have enough money. They just weren't getting enough work,
Right.
which is such a bummer,
Yeah.
because who knows the cool art they could have made.
Yeah.
And I think that's one of the things that really fuels me in my business,
Mm-hmm.
wanting to be able to take those people on into my team
Sure.
and and give them work.
Totally.
Yeah.
Totally. I know what you mean. I think I'm entering into I've entered into a phase of my life where I understand how much more powerful collaboration is. Not only that, but how much I want to throw myself into the right kinds of collaboration, because it whatever you're doing, whether it's music or film or a business, working together synchronistically as a team. I mean, generating that kind of synergy, you create something so much more momentous than you ever could have on your own. And so
Mhm.
I agree with you. I think a lot about that. I come across a lot of super talented musicians and audio engineers and technicians, and I think, man, I want to create a reason for us
Right.
to work together, to play together, to create
Right.
together.
And earlier we were talking about origins.
Yeah.
So can you take me, because I wanna talk about how old you are.
Please, let's not talk about it.
But before that,
I'll talk about
I want to talk about what you were doing before music, what age you were,
Yeah.
where you were living, and when that transition happened.
Yeah. Well, I started playing music out live in public when I was 17 years old, and formed a band, and we had some gigs here and there.
Are you from here?
More or less, yeah. I grew up in San Luis Obispo, and then when I was 14, family moved to Santa Barbara.
Okay.
So I went to high school here. When I was 17, I realized I wanted to do music
Mm-hmm.
full time, and so I actually tested out of high school. I went to City College first, and
That's baller.
yeah, I wasn't there. There were a lot of other students. It was kind of a fad at that time. Like,
Okay.
oh, I can get my high school
Nice.
proficiency exam.
No
I'm
one in
outta
my high
here.
school did that.
Yeah, well, I didn't know a ton of people in high school, because I moved here as a freshman, and I never really got into the high school vibe too much. But I went straight to City College, which was a beautiful city college here, and they had some great theater and acting classes, and I started to take those because I knew I had to develop my performer side, and I
Cool.
was shy, and I was more of an introverted person. I knew I needed to overcome stage fright and certain fears. So I started to do that, and then I had that familial pressure of you should go to college, get a degree, and I thought about doing something pragmatic like economics. I was good at math, but I decided to major in acting and theater. At UCSB, there was a BFA acting program.
Mm-hmm.
So I did 3 years of intensive actor training, voice,
No, I
movement,
didn't know this.
reading a ton of Shakespeare.
Yeah.
I ended up minoring in English too because I knew I was a writer and
Mm-hmm.
I like to tell stories and to write. So I knew that would also be of service to the music and the musician side of me. So I after I graduated from UCSB, I went to Los Angeles. I passed on a full scholarship to get an MFA in acting from a really top grad school that had one of these coveted acting programs, full scholarship, and
Which one?
they would have given me a living stipend. It was called, I don't believe it exists anymore. It was called the National Theater Conservatory at the Denver Center for the Performing Arts.
Oh my God!
So the Denver
What a
Center,
name!
the Denver Center still exists. It's the largest, supposedly it's the largest theater company and theater complex between Chicago and San Francisco.
Mm-hmm.
And they had this conservatory program, an MFA, 3-year MFA program that accepted like 8 students a year out of 600 applicants. But around the crash of 2008, somewhere around there, they lost funding and they cut the program. So I would have been one of the last graduating classes had I done it, but I didn't. I had this experience of a little bit of a nervous breakdown because I knew that theater wasn't my ultimate calling. Even though I could do acting and I had some success at it or whatever, I knew that music was the gift I had to offer, and I wanted to go out in the world and do that. So long story short, after I moved to Los Angeles, I continued to pursue music. I was not yet at that professional level yet in terms of what I consider to be professional, but I was taking gigs at little wine bars and making $100 here, $150 there. At the same time, I was going after some small acting gigs. I got some little bit commercial parts here and there. And then I did the stereotypical thing of being a waiter for a while.
Right.
I actually had a job for a summer at Universal Studios being a tour guide. So I did a few odds and ends here and there. But then I moved to Chicago in 2008, and I moved to Chicago to kind of walk away from acting and really focus on music. And I knew there was a big performing arts scene there. But I also felt at that age and at that time in my life, like I really should have another vocation that will, add some longevity to my music career. Because I didn't want to be like one of those people you talked about that threw all their cards into one hat and then burnt out on music and said, "Fuck it, I'm going to be an accountant now or whatever." So I was always fascinated by the healing arts, health and wellness. So I ended up actually going to a massage therapy program. But I didn't want to just be a massage therapist. I wanted to also be a yoga teacher because I had gotten into yoga around the time that I graduated from college, and it had been a huge life enhancement for me, and it had helped me in every area of my life, particularly as a performer. So after massage therapy school, which was 12 months, I went through a 3-month program, 200-hour yoga teacher training. And then after that was done, I tapped it off at the Holy Trinity. I became a certified personal trainer. So I apologize for the long answer to that question, but I would say that before I really fully owned music as my life path, my career path, that's what I did. I was a massage therapist, yoga teacher, personal trainer, a health and wellness professional, if you will.
And a performer.
Yeah. And I was performing at those times too. Yeah. But it's interesting because in that, it was roughly 2 years that I really studied those 3 things: yoga, personal training, massage therapy.
Okay.
Music sort of took a back seat.
Sure.
I mean, I was still I shouldn't say it took a back seat, but I was still doing it, but I was a little more seriously focused on having a side career in the health and wellness and fitness world. But it's interesting because I moved back to, I did that for a couple of years. I worked at a nice upscale gym and taught yoga classes. I had personal training clients, had some body work clients. I moved back to California in 2012 because of some family circumstances that had unfolded, and wanted to be closer to family. And um, I continued to do those things for a while, but interestingly enough, my music seemed to really start to flourish back here in Santa Barbara. I didn't expect to stay here. I thought I'll come here for a little while, check it out, but I'll probably venture on to San Francisco or Los Angeles, because that's where, you got to be in a big city,
Right.
got to be around that. But as you were talking about, I discovered, oh wow, there's a ton of wineries here, and there's all these breweries popping up, and there's some music venues here and there, and I found that my style of music, which was very beach and nature vibe and very West Coast,
Yeah.
rock, soul, reggae, it really was welcomed here, and there was a market for it here. So I started to fill up my calendar with gigs, and then slowly, it wasn't like I planned it this way, but I just slowly, the health and wellness fitness side of things just sort of dissolved as
Yeah.
I focused more and more on music. So that happened a little more organically. And I kept teaching yoga for a number of years after I was a full-time musician, but then I realized, oh, I don't need to do those things anymore. So I stopped looking for teaching gigs.
Right.
I stopped looking for, personal training clients, and I just instead kept looking for gigs, and the work flowed in enough. However, at the same time, and this is something we've talked about before,
Yeah.
part of the reason I was able to make that work is because I made sure I had a very low overhead,
Right.
and I was living on a sailboat for a number of years, and so I wouldn't have been able to have probably let go of those other careers had I not been a little frugal in terms of how I was living,
Right.
So, but that's part of the journey too. Sometimes you have to, you got to be that way,
Yeah.
for a little while until you're on your own 2 feet.
Right. You mentioned how yoga affected your performance, improved your performance.
Mm-hmm.
How? Because you do yoga every day
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
on the beach.
Not always on the beach, but yeah, I do it every day. I mean, there's some days when I'm traveling when I don't, if I'm like traveling
Sure.
internationally or whatever.
There's some
get a-
days
get
I
a-
don't shower, but
Right.
for the most part, I shower every day.
But yeah, I would just say that the top things for me is that it gets me out of my head into my body. It gets me deeply connected with my breath, which as a singer is the most important thing. And then third, it opens up the body and all the chambers of the body. And as singers, we understand. I mean, whether or not we're singers or not, actually, our bodies are instruments. We are instruments.
Mm-hmm.
So the more loose and limber, the more flexible we are, while at the same time, of course, keeping our strength, keeping ourselves together. I think the more powerfully we are as instruments in whatever we're doing. So, yeah, yoga really got me understanding that this is a mind-body instrument,
Right.
and there's that spirit side of things too, but understanding how to take care of the instrument, how to open the instrument, how to clean the instrument, how to revitalize the instrument, all very important stuff.
All right, I've made you talk for a long time.
Yeah, it's your turn.
Um,
What did you do before? Let's talk, because you were in the corporate world,
mm-hmm.
right?
Yeah. So I grew up a volleyball player, and that was like my job. I wasn't a good student, didn't care. And then I got into college and realized you're not allowed to cheat in college. So I had to figure out a new way of getting through. So that was when I actually like buckled down and like learned how to learn.
Yeah.
And then as soon as that ended, I went and worked at a software company down in Goleta and did that for 2.5 years. And during that time, learned a ton. Like, I showed up really stupid to that job and like very, very underqualified.
Yeah.
And they made me very qualified. Like, really helpful things like the difference between a web browser and a operating system, where they would, one of the tech people, I would say like, hey, I'm having this problem. And they'd be like, can you tell me what OS you're using? And I'd be like, I'm in Google Chrome, and they'd be like, "That's a browser. I need the operating system." And I'd be like, "I'm sorry.
Yeah.
How do I find that?" They're like, "Click about this Mac."
Yeah.
And I'm like, "I'm so sorry." So being much more technically fluent,
Yeah.
which is super helpful. I mean, we live
Yeah.
in an age where that's really important, and you kind of need to know about, like, not all the nuts and bolts, but you need to not be ignorant about how our world is evolving. And
Totally.
when people start naming off like coding languages, you could very quickly assume that they're making them up. And that's like a real, like, people will make, like, if they don't, if you are ignorant and you're like, I need you to do this kind of work, they can say phrases like, all right, cool, I'll need to make a robot that can go in and like search through your cache and do these things. And it means nothing. They actually made that up so that they could like charge you more and be like, but if you know what it takes to solve your problem,
Right.
then you can say, no, you don't need to make a robot. Look it up.
Yeah.
Like just like, that's not a thing. Don't give me that right now.
Right. Right.
Um
So you learned some of the limbo. You knew what to.
Yeah, some
to
of the
look out
lingo,
for.
and like, yeah, so I learned a lot, and then that was a time that I saved a lot so that I had a little nest egg so that I could transition into full-time music. And I've still never had to tap into that nest egg because I was moonlighting as the musician at night.
Yeah.
So I was actually like making the good money through tech, and then at night making more money as a musician, and then saving all of it. And then by the time that I quit, I had enough work that I was able to do this full time.
Nice.
Yeah.
That brings up an interesting topic, I think, for a lot of people, probably a lot of listeners out there, is they think a lot. I know a lot of friends think about how and when do I make that transition from being an employee of somebody else's company to being my own boss, or setting out on whatever creative or financial or business venture I want to do. And I know there's no solid answer for that because everybody's journey is different, but that is something that folks have asked me a lot about, is like, when did you know when did you know it was that right time to step off the old ship and onto the new one,
Right.
knowing that you couldn't have one foot on both ships forever, that eventually you'd have to decide.
There's a phrase that you can't poop on two toilets.
I haven't heard that one before. I've heard shit or get off the pot, but that's kind of a similar thing.
Yeah.
Right?
So for me, I deal highly with fear. Like, fear is one of my main.
Wait, you mean you get high to deal with fear?
No. Fear is like one of my main emotions that I feel very frequently.
Yeah.
And it's
going to be the topic of our next podcast, I think.
That sounds great.
How to use that.
And also like not having enough. It's the fear of not having what I'll need when I need it.
Right.
Which is why if you see me any place, I have like this backpack and it has like all this stuff with me.
Yeah.
Recently I was at a gig and like the power went out. I had a battery in my car, like a battery that I could power like a small speaker system with.
How funny.
This is the odds of me over preparing. This is how I over prepare.
Bring a generator with you to every gig.
Right. It's oftentimes over the top. But for me, that's what makes me feel comfortable all the time. And we can go off that forever. I can talk about preparedness.
No, but that's a good point, is that sometimes fear drives us to be overly prepared.
Right.
Which is probably it's a good thing to be prepared.
Right.
You know?
So but when it came to like making the switch, the way I over prepared was that I saved $50,000. Because that to me felt like too much. Like something could go really wrong.
Right.
Like
you'd have a year or 2 years.
Yeah, like I could have a real illness and be able to pay for it and then get back on the horse. And that was like my main fear. Like, what if the worst thing happens? How do I prepare for that?
Yep.
So there was that, but then there was also like how much money am I bringing in from gigs every month, and what are my current living expenses? So my current living expenses were like $1,250
Yeah.
for the month, and I was probably pulling in $1,000
Yeah.
per month, and I was like, I could do that. Like I could
Right.
I could easily add on a couple gigs. That was before I didn't even think about taxes, so that's like a real thing to factor in. There were lots of things I didn't factor in, but
Right.
because I gave myself, like, because I knew my income was pretty close to my expenses, and because I had that huge nest egg, I was like, I can make that leap. And then when I
Yeah.
did, because you're not going to know what's on the other side. So you take this
Yeah.
leap, and then you find out all this stuff. You're like, wait, oh my God, I'm going to have to pay taxes. Oh,
Yeah.
wait, my employer's not going to take out taxes, so I'm going to have to save up for that.
Right.
And then, yeah, I also have friends that don't pay taxes.
Right.
So, but that's a very different, that's its own risk.
Sure.
If you get audited, and you have not paid your taxes, you will
Right.
be effed.
Right. Right.
Um,
You gotta have a really good CPA to get you out of that one.
yes.
No, I'm appreciating everything you're sharing, and this I didn't actually know this about you beforehand in terms of making that leap, but I'm hearing you talk about this, and I'm immediately going to metaphors. This I think very metaphorically.
Sure. I'm
And-
gonna close this window.
Okay. And I'm a sailor. I've been sailing for the last 15 years of my life, and one of the things I think this is totally analogous to taking a long expedition. Like, say you want to go, I'm going to sail down to the tip of Baja California from the Central Coast of California. You got to get ready. You've got to have a ship. You've got to stock up on your supplies. You've got to make sure you've got enough. You've got to make sure everything in your vessel is in tip-top shape. Sails, the boat, fix all leakings. And I would say, it's kind of, maybe it sounds like it was a bit of a similar experience for you when you stepped away from corporate America or the corporate world into doing music full time. Is taking inventory of what you had. There's always going to be risk. That's the thing. And people, I think the entrepreneurs out there who are listening, or any adventurers or ventures, have to understand that risk is a huge part of it. Nothing is guaranteed, nothing's for certain, except for your growth and evolution, I believe.
And your death.
Yeah, right.
I'm gonna give you
and taxes. The taxes that you talked about. Well, no, that's a very good point too. Is understanding our quote unquote mortality in terms of this life. It's there's a clock that's running, and if not now, then when? And if not now, then we better prepare for it coming.
And it was this weird thing where I realized that my fear of not doing it was becoming greater than my fear of doing it. And I think that's a really important space to get into.
That is.
Because you have to, I meet so many people. I got to talk with my dad about this when he was here for Thanksgiving, and we talked about how I meet, like, some grown men come up to me during gigs, and they say,
and they cry.
They and they cry. You're the son I always wanted. And they tell me how they also play music.
Yep.
And they used to be in a band.
Yep. That happens to me all the time.
And they wish that they had kept with it.
Right.
And that's like one story, and then I'll hear this other story where it's like, I used to play this instrument, or like I always wanted to learn this instrument, but I didn't because of this thing that happened. And like this teacher told me like I couldn't play well, or like, so that what they're, all of them are saying the same thing, which is I regret something.
Sure.
And for me, like projecting forward in my life, I want to look back and say, at least I tried. At least I tried that.
Exactly.
Like, I really tried that.
Yeah.
'Cause one of the rules that I made for myself from the beginning was like, I'm going to do this full time 2 years.
Yep.
Because I'm guessing I'm going to want to like pull the eject button all the time.
Yeah.
And the whole time I have wanted to pull the eject button.
Yeah.
Like,
yeah.
Right now I'm in kind of like a nice spurt, so I feel fine. But
yeah.
Usually I want to quit because it's hard.
Sure.
But but
can relate with that. I still very often will get these feelings of, I'm just gonna go and live on an organic farm somewhere
Right.
in the jungle and I
Right.
could do that and I could be happy,
Mm-hmm.
but I feel, I don't know about you, but I feel it's sort of like an inner calling. It's a purpose that there's a reason I'm here, and that is to share light and share positive awareness and consciousness through music, and to awaken people,
Mm-hmm.
awaken people to new levels of awareness, to
Mm-hmm.
new levels of power within themselves,
Yes.
to be um, the love that they always wanted, to be the the solution that they've always been looking for in
Right.
their own lives or in the world, to embody that. So
And what example would you set if when it got hard you quit? Because some of this, like at a certain point, you hit a wall, and that wall is firm, and maybe you should quit. Like that's like a real thing that everyone needs to think about. Like,
mhm.
at what point should I quit? If like the loved one, like someone you love, is really sick and you need to take care of them,
Yeah.
you should quit and take care of. That's the
take a
higher
break.
priority.
Totally.
But the ability, like being able to show with your life how to push through these feelings, and not just like brief feelings. I'm talking about like 4 months of
Yeah.
like, I can't see the light at the end of the tunnel. I'm doing what I think I'm called to do,
Right.
and I'm just going to like be faithful to that call.
Yeah.
And then at the other end of that tunnel, you're like, oh, I see. Like,
Yeah.
I understand why I needed to go through that. Because like perseverance is hard, and
Yeah.
like everyone can quit.
Yeah.
And
Well, and let's be honest too. Quitting, an interesting word, right?
Mhm.
I think it's a day-to-day choice.
Mhm.
It's like there's the difference between taking a break,
Mhm.
taking a rest,
Yeah.
and quote unquote quitting. Quitting is when somebody says, I'm just not good at this. I'm not going to do this anymore, or
Right.
whatever it is, or this isn't worth my time. And they don't pick up the guitar again, or they don't go back to the typewriter, or whatever it is. But taking a break as a creator of any kind is incredibly powerful and important. To
Yeah.
sometimes take a rest, to step back and get perspective about it, because I think a lot of times we have to reassess the reasons why we're doing something.
Right.
And in my experience, the times when I've burnt out have been when I wasn't focused on the big picture. I was focused on the little picture, and the little picture is always my human ego.
Mm.
That's the little picture. The big picture is us, is our community, our society, our world, the power behind all of this that's happening. You know what I
Mhm.
mean? The source energy, the creative presence of life itself.
Right.
And I think that brings up an interesting and important topic of discussion is, when we're just working for ourselves, the little me,
Mhm.
we're going to burn out, because it's just not how, it's actually not how nature works. Even though
Yeah.
you see there is this survivalism out in the natural world. Really, I think what carries life forward is actually union, coming together, helping each other, being of service to each other, being protective agents for one another.
Right.
That's how species survive. That's how communities thrive.
Right.
That's how artists thrive.
Right.
And we were talking about this a little bit too, right? We live in this day and age where it's a little bit more challenging to find, an artist collective. We're not living in Greenwich Village in the 1960s, in the
Right.
folk scene or something. So we really have to come together as, entrepreneurs, as adventurers, as, explorers,
Mhm.
and because, as we know, five pairs of eyes are going to see a lot more of what's going on around us
Mhm.
than just one. I totally forgot why I went off on that tangent, but I'm going to pass it on over to you. 'Cause it had to do originally with your journey of stepping away from.
Yeah. Well, it was because you were mentioning how my fear is like jumping into the unknown and finding
Yeah.
that you don't know what you're going to come across, and that's the whole
Right.
concept of risk.
Exactly.
That's where like sailing came in, which yeah, I really agree. W- I mean, we've been talking for like
You made it. Yeah, you made it. I just want to say, it seems that you, from the story you shared with me, you
Mhm.
made it pretty easy to step off the corporate ladder or whatever.
Yeah, I
and-
wanted
and
5
into the-
parachutes.
Yeah.
Yeah,
And that's smart, man. I mean, look,
Yeah.
you really can't be too prepared. However, there is obviously there's that debate about, well, you'll never be fully ready. Just do it, right?
Right.
This like that. There's genius in boldness.
right.
So just go for it, because even if you're not fully ready, you're going to learn, oh, these are some of my weaknesses. I have to strengthen up in this area. And yeah, I wouldn't have known until I made the leap.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
you were much more calculated in that than I was.
right.
Mine happened a little bit more just intuitively, like
Sure.
I'm just going to,
We have very different operating systems, the two
Yeah.
of us. Yeah.
and that's why we've come together.
That's why you look as young as you do.
Stop. No, thank you.
The level of stress I have put on my body just with my own thought life, I'm sure has aged me like an extra 5 years.
No.
Which is why I've had to learn to meditate. Which again has also been extremely helpful
Yeah.
in maintaining a healthier thought life. Okay, we've been talking for like 45 minutes.
Okay. This is good.
What things in this podcast, because that's like a decent introduction to the
Yeah.
two of us.
Sure.
I feel like we also have genuinely talked to each other during this time.
We have. This
So-
has been a real conversation.
Right. So at this point, like what like my thoughts for this podcast, we said what we're gonna do 6 podcast episodes. That's
Yeah.
gonna be our thing. This is the first.
Yep.
So only 5 more.
Yep.
What are some things that you want to cover during that time? I mean, you already talked about like fear and like working through
Mm-hmm.
feelings of fear. Do you want are you thinking fear within the context of how to transition from like doing what you love on the side to like doing it full time, or like what interested you about that?
Well, when you brought it up as being one of the most powerful like forces in your life,
Sure.
I think it's worth a episode of it itself to discuss what fear is, how it drives us both negatively and positively,
Mm-hmm.
because it can do both.
Sure.
It can drive us into the ground, but it can also help us swim and like get our head out of the water too.
Yeah.
So I'd like to discuss I'd like to talk about how we can take fear and transform it into inspiration.
Yeah.
And how we can use these quote unquote forces, which they are, just like the
Yeah.
wind or the waves or the sunlight,
Sure.
to energize us and propel us, get us from point A
Cool.
to point B. So
An overall jujitsu episode where we talk about
exactly.
using negative momentum
yeah,
on your opponent.
exactly. So let's talk about that, because as we know, I believe fear is that thing that allows most people not only to be controlled, but it by others, whether that's government
Sure, yeah.
or companies, whatever. But it also is that one thing that keeps most people from doing what their heart is calling them to do.
Right.
It's generally either fear of failure or even greater fear of success,
Mm-hmm.
and that's something
That's real.
that
I'll give you that.
that's real, and that I
Yeah.
want that I want to talk about, because we both have faced that. So the
Mhm.
fear of failure versus the fear of success,
Yeah.
and instead, how do we move into this place of just love?
Mm-hmm.
Of being, love of sharing what we have, understanding that ultimately there is no failure and there is no success. There just is,
Hmm.
there just is being
Yeah.
who we are and sharing what comes through us,
Yeah.
whatever that might be.
Yeah. All right, I'm down for that.
Okay.
And that's okay, yeah. I think that's a good one. The reason why I really care about that is because there are a lot of people in my life that I care about who withhold their art because they don't want to deal with what the world is going to say about it.
Yeah.
And in doing so, I never get to see their art.
Right. What a tragedy, right?
Right.
Yeah.
Like yeah, so I'm totally down.
Yeah.
That's a good one. I also talked about finances, like
Yes.
wanting to talk to my buddy who's he manages my Roth IRA, and like hearing about how like what advice he would give to artists
Yeah.
who have an entirely different temperament,
Right.
and an entirely different like we're harder to schedule, we're harder to meet with, in a lot of ways we're harder to talk to, but like we will also have living expenses when we're older.
Exactly.
So like I would
Yeah.
love to hear one of them kind of discuss that.
Absolutely.
Because I'm trying to learn how to get through to my friends who I really care about. I've had to say the phrase, I don't know why this works, but I've had to say this phrase to many people. I'm like, hey, can I real shit? Can you hear me for a second? Like, I'm going to give you some real shit.
Yeah.
And I don't know why that has to be the phrasing.
Yeah.
But that's like the only thing that breaks through to people
Can
where
I
they're
be
like,
honest with you.
oh, yeah. Yeah, and then yeah, so I would love to hear how they would change their pitch
Yeah.
for financial planning.
Yeah.
Okay, so that's 2.
Yeah.
Let's think about 3 more.
Well, one of the things I think that we could dive into more, what you were talking about, how meditation, and we can,
Okay.
we can weave yoga into that, but I think covering the topic of identifying and eliminating stress
Yeah.
as much as possible
Yeah.
empowers us immeasurably as creators and
Mhm.
entrepreneurs, and why that is, and we'll get into that. That's something that we want to get into more. But overcoming stress, learning how to operate in the world more from a place of ease and easefulness, relaxed but not lazy,
Yes.
just relaxed and at ease, and how that's our friend. Whereas tension and tightness,
Because people think stress is the fire that fuels their success,
right?
when that's not true.
Yeah. That's
And
right. It can become a fire that consumes you, and
Yeah.
consumes your
Right.
your business or creative side too. Yeah.
I think that's super smart. And even talking about like in this last month, me moving, like doing headspace, doing guided meditation, and then your
Mhm.
practice of yoga, like going through, because there's going to be different strokes for different people. So
Totally.
talking through those options and
Yep.
why we think it resonates with us,
Yeah.
and
What's worked for us.
yeah,
Yeah.
that'd be great. Those are solid.
Yeah.
I'm shocked that this is that we're like
coming
actually coming
together.
up with these things.
I mean, for two creative musicians,
Yeah.
or just two musicians in general, you
Yeah.
know, to come up with something of substance, it's not so easy to do. So this is
Yeah. I mean, one of the things that's kind of on the horizon for you is also like moving out of Santa Barbara.
Yeah, or at least venturing out of here
Right.
for an extended period of time. I've gotten to this new place in my life where I understand nothing is fixed, nothing is forever.
Right.
So, and I've been pretty comfortable in this place. You know, I've been able to make it work as a musician, but I've come to a point where I realize it's time to move
Mm-hmm.
and circulate and evolve,
Mm-hmm.
or burn out.
Right.
And as Eckhart Tolle puts that in it was one of his books, A New Earth. He says we're at this point where we choose, we're going to evolve or we perish.
Mm-hmm.
You know, as individuals and a species. I kind of feel that way as a creative
Mm-hmm.
being in the world, is that it's time for me to circulate and step outside the comfort zone. Otherwise, there's just no more growth here, you know.
And I think that's another thing that we could really talk about is the role of travel
Yeah.
in the creative, because we both go on tours. We both just also like travel as people.
Yep.
Like because there's like other trips you take.
Yeah.
And then there's also like you're thinking about like it's more than a tour.
Exactly.
It's like yeah.
How do we unify different aspects of our life existence to where a tour can be both for business and for pleasure? It can be, you know what I mean? It can be both for creative inspiration and, you know, just personal exploration.
Yeah, and I think people go on tour because they think they're musicians and they should,
Right.
versus they have something that they want to get out of that tour.
Yeah.
And you, like on this next movement thing that you do,
Yeah.
you're doing it because you need something,
Right.
and you are going to get it in a different location,
Right.
which is really important.
Yeah.
Like, and that's like it's something that people need. Like, there's a lot of logistics that go around that.
Sure.
There's a lot of circumstance that makes that like a healthy and like helpful one for
Yep.
you.
Yeah.
Yeah, like I hear about tours that people go on and I'm like, that sounds miserable. I
Yeah.
would never want to do that.
Yeah.
And then like I tell people about some of the tours or like parts of the tours that I've done, and I'm like, now this was basically like a vacation where I got
Right.
to see all these people that I loved
Yeah.
and like just hang out and watch movies with them, and then at night I would go and play these gigs, and
Yeah.
it was calm and it was easy, and I love that. Like
Absolutely.
yeah, so I feel like revitalized
Yeah.
a lot by like, and I think that's how you know whether or not you're doing it right. It was like, how do you feel
That's a good point.
at
Traveling
the
in
end of all this?
traveling in a way that fosters our creativity and our community,
Right.
because those two things, creativity, community,
Mm-hmm.
intertwined.
Yeah.
As far as I'm concerned.
Because
They're
we're not going on tour to like play to stadiums, or
not yet.
like right.
Only in our dreams, but
Yeah.
that's part of it.
But in the scenario where we are trying to like continue to plant seeds in other cities
Yeah.
and like cultivate those relationships,
Sure.
and
That's definitely a topic we want to discuss, is how do we systematically and effectively plant seeds in other markets and then water those seeds, because that's something that any small business owner can
Right.
relate to and
Right.
needs to be thinking about,
Right.
talking about.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. All right, so we got fear,
Yeah.
finance, travel.
Yeah.
The other one was
Stress elimination.
stress. Yep.
Using meditation and yoga.
That's 4. We're about to slay this dragon.
Yeah.
The
The fifth one will be a mystery. What we're gonna leave.
fifth one, we can make it miscellaneous.
That's right. Yeah.
Um.
Or we ought to ask. I do want to ask our listeners, our viewers, if there are any out there. I know there's somewhere. What they want to talk about too. You know, maybe there's something that
Cool.
we'll be open to the universe / our community